Hello, everyone. Welcome to the 170 Literary and Jury Charge. We're going to start off with a small selection from Don't Sweat the Small Stuff, and this is on Allow Yourself to Be Bored. Ready? For many of us, our lives are so filled with stimuli, not to mention responsibilities, that it's almost impossible for us to sit still and do nothing, much less relax, even for a few minutes. A friend of mine said to me, "People are no longer human beings. We should be called human doings." I was first exposed to the idea that occasional boredom can actually be good for me while studying with a therapist in La Conner, Washington, a tiny little town with very little to do. After finishing our first day together, I asked my instructor, "What is there to do around here at night?" He responded by saying, "What I'd like you to do is allow yourself to be bored. Do nothing. This is part of your training." At first I thought he was kidding. Why on earth would I choose to be bored? I asked him. He went on to explain that if you follow yourself to be bored, even for an hour or less, and don't fight it, the feelings of boredom will be replaced with feelings of peace. And after a little practice, you'll learn to relax. Much to my surprise, he was absolutely right. At first, I could barely stand it. I was so used to doing something even the second that I really struggled, or I was so used to doing something every second that I really struggled to relax. But after a while, I got used to it and have long since learned to enjoy it. I'm not talking about hours of idle time or laziness, but simply learning the art of relaxing or just being rather than doing for a few minutes each day. There isn't a specific technique other than to consciously do nothing. Just sit still, perhaps, and look out the window and notice your thoughts and feelings. At first, you may get a little anxious, but each day it will get easier. The payback is tremendous. Much of our anxiety and inner struggle stems from our busy, overactive minds that always need something to entertain them, something to focus on, and always wondering what is next. While we're eating dinner, we wonder what's for dessert. While eating dessert, we ponder what we should do afterward. After that evening, it's what should we do this weekend? After we've been out, we walk into the house and immediately turn on the television, pick up our cell phone, open a book, or start cleaning. It's almost as though we're frightened at the thought of not having something to do even for a minute. The beauty of doing nothing is that it teaches you to clear your mind and relax. It allows your mind the freedom to not know for a brief period of time. Just like your body, your mind needs an occasional break from its hectic routine. When you allow your mind to take a break, it comes back stronger, sharper, and more focused and creative. When you allow yourself to be bored, it takes on an enormous amount of pressure off of you to be performing and doing something every single second of the day. Now, when either of my two children say to me, "I am bored," I respond by saying, "Great, be bored for a while. It's good for you." Once I say this, they always give up on the idea of me solving their problem. You probably never thought someone would actually suggest that you allow yourself to be bored. I guess there's a time for everything. Okay. I've got some legal opinion here. Ready? The subject of deliberate murder and premeditated murder is interwoven into one issue. We define only murder, which is perpetrated by a willing or willful killing, a deliberate killing, or a premeditated killing, when express malice aforethought is present as murder of the first degree. The word willful means intentional. Willful is something that is said or done deliberately. A synonym for willful is voluntary. The word deliberate means formed or determined or arrived at based upon a careful process of thinking and weighing any and all considerations for and against the proposed course of action. The word premeditated means to consider beforehand any plan which is thought out, schemed, or planned before an act is premeditated. When you find that a killing was preceded and accompanied by an obvious and deliberate intent on the part of the defendant to kill, which was the result of careful deliberation and premeditation, so that the act must have been performed based upon pre-existing reflections and not governed by a sudden heat of passion or other condition precluding the idea of deliberation, it is murder of the first degree. The law cannot undertake the responsibility of measuring in seconds, minutes, hours, or days the length of the period of time during which a thought must be weighed and pondered before it can mature into an actual intent to kill, which is truly deliberate and premeditated. The time will vary with different individuals and under varying circumstances. The true test is based not on the duration of time, but rather on the extent of the contemplation. A cold and calculated decision may be arrived at in a rather short period of time, but a rash and impulsive act, even though it includes the intent to kill, does not require such deliberation and premeditation as defined by law as an unlawful killing and murder of the first degree. Any opinion is subject to interpretation and consideration because all situations will vary according to the surrounding circumstances. In order to constitute a deliberate, premeditating killing, the question of killing must be weighed and considered, and the reasons for and against such a choice must be weighed. With this in mind and knowing the consequences, my opinion is that a deliberate, premeditated killing is perpetrated when a person decides to and does kill. Okay. I've got an article for you. This is called Alice and the Chipmunk. Change your perspective on the world and the world changes forever. Ready? Here we go. There was a chipmunk in my house, just sitting there in my bedroom, looking straight ahead. I said, "Oh, it's you again." It was his third visit this year. My first attempt at catching a chipmunk had been quite an adventure. "Bob," I'd say to my cat, "get him." I followed with a broom and a bucket, and the plan being that once Bob cornered the chipmunk, I could sweep him up and set him free in the yard. So the three of us ran circles around my bedroom. It was a Saturday morning, and here I was inside a Tom and Jerry cartoon. This time, though, the chipmunk wasn't afraid. He just sat there staring forward. He seemed to look right through me. "I'm sorry," I said. "You'll have to go outside." I swished him into the bucket with a magazine, then opened the window and put him out on the porch roof. But instead of scurrying away, he just sat there looking forward again. It was eerie. He could have been an autistic child. He could have been Alice, the woman across the street. For months Alice had sat on her front stoop looking forward to what I wasn't sure. Alice is about 70 years old and lives alone in the house where she was born. She watches me bouncing in and out of my house, charged with my day's events, never slowing except when I muster enough courage to look a chipmunk in the eye. "Are you dead?" I asked the chipmunk. Just then Bob the cat jumped out of a tree and onto the roof. "Beat it, Bob," I said. The cat nosed the chipmunk. The chipmunk bolted and fell off the roof. "Bob, you big galoot," I yelled. I ran downstairs and out the door. The chipmunk was lying on his side. "Are you okay?" I asked. "Are you dead now?" He righted himself and sat there on the brick pavement and looked forward. None of his adventures, the tumble through the sky, the thud on the pavement, could shake this animal from his revier or his reverie. Alice was watching from her front stoop, her neck raised high, wondering why I was talking to the sidewalk. "A chipmunk," I said to her. "What's that?" "I have a little chipmunk here." "Oh," she said. It was the longest conversation we'd had in some time. Alice hadn't talked much lately. She stopped talking to me and the other neighbor about 6 months ago when her sister died. We'd all noticed it. Once, though, she had surprised me. "How you doing, Alice?" I'd say, all cheerful. "Can't complain," she replied, not looking at me. This was where the conversation usually ended. "Well, good," I said. "Nobody cares anyway," she added. "Oh, Alice, that is just not true." "Well, I've been sad," Alice said. "Ever since Emily died, I've been very sad." She started to cry. I offered a few clumsy bits of consolation, and then she turned away. It became an issue with me. Every day I saw her, and every day I kicked myself for myself turning away from Alice's grief, as if she were contagious, as if she were a rabid chipmunk I wasn't allowed to pick up, hold, or comfort. Eventually the chipmunk began behaving like a chipmunk and scurried out into the street. I scurried out too. So did Alice. The three of us looked at one another, bemused. Finally Alice said, "He's very lonely." The next thing I knew, the sun was going down, and I was in Alice's yard talking about sisters, cemeteries, and other topics. It felt good to be there. It felt like a victory. I had never really been or seen Alice's face close up. No longer was she the sad, silent woman across the street. I studied the creases in her skin, her wobbly jawline, her rubbery mouth. She was a different person, very elastic. It happens just like that. You change your perspective on the world, and the world changes forever. Before I left, Alice picked up a shovel, dug up a peony, and gave it to me. I planted it in my yard that very night. All right, cute story. I've got an article here on U.S. Postal Service, and this is from the Congressional Record. Okay, ready? Mr. Speaker, 3 months ago, I introduced H.R. 93, a bill designed to provide for congressional review of our postal services. In recent years, the U.S. Postal Service has proposed the elimination of the 6-day mail delivery plan. The Postal Service has recently dropped this ill-advised idea following a series of protests from the postal employees, the public, and the Congress. The Postal Service established a policy that, with the exception of certain residences, no new residential developments would have the privilege of receiving door-to-door or box-to-box mail service. Most recently, the Postal Service has announced plans to continue the new 9-digit zip code system despite the broad opposition of the public to this proposal. These and other programs and policies of the U.S. Postal Service are indicative of the sad state of the objectives of the Postal Reform Act of 1990. The Postal Reform Act has had a negative effect and has been unable to serve the public efficiently and effectively. The policy of the U.S. Postal Service is too important to be removed from the responsibilities of Congress. The American people rely on Congress to consider and resolve the problems of the U.S. Postal Service. My bill, H.R. 19, addresses these problems. Whenever the U.S. Postal Service proposes a change to the postal services that would have a national impact, the Postal Service must submit that proposed change to Congress. Congress would then authorize the appropriate committees to review the changes and above reject or suggest revisions. If within 90 days the committee makes their recommendation, the U.S. Postal Service would have another 90 days to implement any changes. Okay. I've got some jury instructions for you. Ready? People versus McKinley. All parties are present. The trial jury is present. The court is going to answer the questions submitted this morning. There was a question in connection with counts 5 and 6 regarding when a principal is armed with a firearm. Said arming not being an element of the above offenses. 7.55 refers to an arming. The portion not being an element of the above offenses is surplus as far as the jury is concerned. It is a part of the verdict forms that were submitted, but it was not in the instructions, so you can disregard that portion. It is not a jury issue. The connection with the second question regarding the same counts 5 and 6, the defendant personally used a firearm within the meaning of Penal Code sections 44332.9 and 44332.8, sections A and B. What is meant by used? If you will look at 7.56, the third paragraph, it will answer your question. It means to display a firearm in a menacing manner, intentionally to fire it, or to intentionally strike or hit a human being with it. Your question number 1 was, what is meant by used? Is covered by that portion. Your second question, is it within the meaning of Penal Code section 44332.9, is of no concern to the jury. I will tell you that's merely an enhancement. If there was a finding against the defendant on that point, it increases the potential penalty. Penal Code section 44332.8 sections A and B are pleadings that restrict probation if there was a finding against the defendant on the use of a firearm in certain offenses. So it is not technically a jury question, but only the factual findings within the law. Those are principally pled so as to put a party on notice of the position of the prosecution for additional possible penalties and no probation. Those questions may be returned to the jury and they will be filed. Mr. Foreman, if you will now return to the instructions with respect to count 6. Your question was, if we substitute assault with a deadly weapon for robbery in the first paragraph, you actually meant the second paragraph, but we will follow your sequence. How does that change the meaning? Okay. My next article here is actually Congressional Record, Public Health Care. Okay, ready? Mr. Speaker, today I am reintroducing a bill to repeal Titles 3 and 6 of the Public Health Services Act, which was created by Public Law 85-602, the National Health and Resources Development Act of 2013. I am recommending the repeal of Public Law 85-602 for the following reasons. First, the law provided for the total and centralized control of healthcare by the federal government. Obviously, this is a major step toward complete nationalization of the healthcare professions. It is recognized that federal health planning will lead to total federal control of healthcare. One of the goals of the plan is to collectivize the payments for medical services. Another goal is to propose maximum allowable charges for drugs and professional services to the elderly and to the public. Health planning can work only if the federal government has total control over the supply of health services. Second, federal health planning is a step toward being political with the entire field of our healthcare. The supply of health services such as hospitals, clinics, and laboratories is not determined by the demand for services, but rather by the officers of a health system agency who make the decisions not always based on the need but on the politics. Third, this law will impede the delivery of health services to the rural areas where the political pull is less than that of the more populous areas. Fourth, Public Law 85-602 is unconstitutional on many grounds. Several states have filed writs charging that the Public Law 85-602 violates the 10th Amendment. If we continue on this path, the American people will be denied the right to control their own health care. Government will be involved in everything from fee setting to hiring medical practitioners. We must change our course and begin to eliminate the government's control and interference into health care. Okay, that concludes our literary and jury charge for the 170 class. Have a great day.